You are listening to the Game Informer Show. I'm your host, Matt Helgeson, and I am joined by Phil Kohler.
Hey, Matt.
And Matt Miller.
Hi there.
First off, I wanted to explain something to our listeners. I know that I published a news story saying that we were going to do a reader mailbag segment, special edition podcast that was going to be all reader mailbag this week. I posted that story in the morning, and then about 3 hours later, Sony admitted that their PSN servers had been hacked and that people's credit card information might have been stolen, which turned out to be quite a big story in the world of video games.
It's kind of big.
So we felt it would be weird and inappropriate if we didn't obviously discuss what is probably going to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest news story in the industry side this year, maybe outside of Nintendo's new console. So to that end, basically what we're doing is we're going to do this first segment with these guys about the PSN hacking kind of scandal, and we're going to do a second segment which will be a sort of shortened reader mailbag segment that I just kind of called some of the questions that I could get together. And then next week we'll actually do a part 2 of Reader Mailbag to answer more people's questions, to kind of give you that full Reader Mailbag episode that you wanted, albeit in 2 parts. And actually, next week's might even be a little longer, so you might get more questions total. But we definitely felt that this Sony story was worth talking about and important to talk about because it has a lot of implications both for Sony, PlayStation Network, the PlayStation 3, and just the industry as a whole, and I think people's security and privacy online. Phil and Miller have both been, everyone's been following the story here pretty closely. I think this all started approximately last Tuesday, or the Tuesday before the ones that just passed would have been when Portal and Mortal Kombat came out.
Yes.
And obviously those are 2 huge games that had big online components, and a lot of people on PlayStation Network were hoping to play online.
I mean, also a lot of people forget this, and I'm sure probably not going to sell quite as much as Portal or Mortal Kombat, but also new SOCOM, which that's totally primarily online. I mean, it has a single player campaign now, but still, that is a very much online focused game. Also released last week, and for the people out there who are fans of the SOCOM franchise, they can't even really play the part of that game that they want to be playing.
Yeah.
Well, and in the world that I'm often kind of covering of stuff like downloadable games and DLC, that's a whole nother thing. If you think about one of these little companies or big companies for that matter that is trying to release content on PlayStation Network during this window of time, that's just not happening.
Yes.
So, for instance, a really great game, we just put up a review yesterday, I think, of Outland, which is a Ubisoft game. Thankfully that's available on Live Arcade as well, but on the PSN side, presumably nobody's getting that game.
Yeah.
Like it's had its release date on PSN and nobody can access it, and that has broad business implications for not just Sony but for other companies as well.
Yeah, certainly with downloadable titles like that, they have kind of a small window and they're really, really relevant.
Right.
By the time that PSN comes back up, those games might not. Any games that were released during this period of time may have lost whatever smaller number of sales they were trying to get in the first place.
Yeah. And the way this sort of I guess evolved over a series of sort of revelations from Sony that got progressively worse as time went on. Yeah. It was almost like sort of it's not nearly that serious as the BP oil scandal, but maybe the way that Sony handled it was a little bit like that, where they tried to sort of underplay it. At first, it was basically people were just either trying to get online to play online games, and they couldn't, especially on a week with, like you said, 3 big releases. So Sony said, I think the quote was, at the time, that was about 8 days ago or 8 or 9 days ago by now, was, we don't know what's going on. It might be a full day or 2 before we're able to get the service completely back up and running, and at this point, it's still not up. Then later,
I don't think anyone expected that was the crazy. That was when people, I think, started realizing that something crazy was going on. I don't think people expected it to be out even over the full weekend.
Yeah.
But then it gets to Monday, and we're coming back in the office, and we're like, wait, PSN's still down? What is going on?
Yeah, and then Sony came back, and they have a great phrase here, which is I always kind of like PR jargon.
Yeah.
And they said that they then admitted, I think early in this week, that yes, we took it down ourselves because of a quote unquote external intrusion into our system, and that affected PlayStation Network and the Curiosity, which I've never understood how to pronounce that.
I think it's just Curiosity.
Dude.
Yeah, I just blew your mind.
Now you put it all together.
Yeah.
Huh?
I'm so dumb.
Is that like their music video service, something like that?
Yeah,
it's
a music streaming service.
You know how they could have resolved that issue? By spelling it Curiosity.
Yeah. I feel like this is
the way it's supposed to be.
I literally just got miles per hour like a month ago. Somebody told me that because like that. I had made a joke about how I didn't get the joke behind the band Buck Cherry.
Yeah.
Which is Chuck Berry. Right. And then somebody's like, oh yeah, like miles per hour. And I was like, what do you mean? From Sonic? And I'm like, yeah, what? Dude, miles per hour? And I was like, oh my God.
Well, now you know.
I've literally been an idiot for like 20 years.
Now you know. Curiosity.
Curiosity. Great music streaming service. It's down as well. So that was bad. And that was maybe the first warning sign that, the fact that it was still down and they'd taken it down themselves on purpose.
Yeah, and rumors started popping up over the weekend. I know I started seeing them pop up on Twitter and elsewhere that like there were people saying like, oh, Sony's going to have to like, I think it was somebody in the Wall Street Journal or something was saying that Sony is completely rebuilding PSN. And it's just like, what happened that they need to be totally like rebuilding the service?
I mean, that's the weird thing about this entire equation for me is the behind the scenes at Sony. It's hard for me to piece together exactly what was going on there that not only was it such a big problem, which in this day and age I can kind of understand. I mean,
sure.
But for the grace of God, go every other company at this point that is probably biting their nails that this isn't going to happen to them. I mean, people have been spending the week talking about how Microsoft, this is why I pay for Xbox Live, and this could never happen on Xbox Live. It totally could happen on Xbox Live.
And I mean, the people who, the Sony Defense Force, which has been out, of course, as happens when these events go on, they've been very quick to point out, like, oh, there was this time in like 2007 when Xbox Live was down for like 16 days.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, so like an outage like this can definitely happen from anyone.
Right. But anyway, I mean, the weird thing is like, I can understand there being the service being hacked. I get that happens these days, but Sony's communication on this stuff just seems really weird because if they knew it was going to be something where they had to rebuild the whole infrastructure, surely that first day they wouldn't have come out of the gate with like it might be down for a day or two, right?
Yeah.
So you assume at that point they just didn't know the extent of the problem.
Yeah.
But then later...
Yeah, the big thing was, I think, about a week prior, or a week after the original outage that had continued, then, which I guess was Tuesday when I put this news story up, the dam broke and they said, well, it looks like people got in, they've maybe stolen information that might include, your login, your password. Most importantly, your credit card information is possibly been compromised, your birthday, your location, any private data that you had stored in the PlayStation Network. And that's when people just, obviously, once you bring your credit card information and identity theft into it, things just went nuts on Twitter that day. It was like insane.
Yeah. There was a lot of rage and justified rage because that's the kind of thing that you don't expect to happen. And what's weird about it is like Sony has since come out and said like, hey, the credit card information, if it got taken, it was encrypted.
It was encrypted, yeah.
But they still seem sort of hesitant to say that it's safe or that they still seem unsure, and that's not the kind of thing you want them to be unsure about.
Right.
Well, and the other thing is the pattern is always, throughout this whole maybe 8 or 9 days has been, they say one thing, and then the next time they make a statement, well, I guess it's a little bit worse than we thought.
Yeah.
And then it's a little bit worse than we thought, and now they're saying, okay, they got your credit card, maybe, but we don't think they did, but they might have. But either way, it's encrypted, probably. But the way this pattern has evolved, it's always tended to verge towards the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario.
The next statement's going to be, we've actually found out that everyone's credit card numbers are just being handed out to random people in China right now.
Yes.
Just so you know.
I know that one of my friends on Twitter, guy who used to write for me, actually said that he had actually had a $1,500 charge appear on his credit card, and it was something where he was like, I can't really prove that this is anything related to the PSN stuff, but the timing of it is pretty suspicious. So there's been like weird anecdotal things popping up around the net.
The one thing, I don't think that anybody who's really excited about the industry and excited about games can look at this and be like, see it as a good thing. I mean, nobody wants Sony to fail or Microsoft to fail or Nintendo to fail. Like, competition is good for us gamers, right? And so anything like this that happens is actually, as much as we complain about it and everything like that, is ultimately kind of not great for the industry. But
it's terrible.
But the one thing that I think could be good that comes out of this in the long term is a little bit more public awareness of just how far-reaching some of these game-connected online networks really are. I mean, this is the equivalent in a lot of ways of if Verizon came out and said, hey, all your information, all your phone numbers and your credit cards connected to your phone accounts have been compromised. I mean, this is the same level of security breach as that, and that was, I think, kind of on display by the fact a couple days ago there was a U.S. senator that straight up like got involved and started sent a letter through and
was questioning basically why Sony took so long to inform its customers about the credit card and identity theft part of it, which I think is a very valid question.
And Sony's line on that, they've again since come out after their original statement and after they saw that people were questioning why they took so long, they came out and said, hey, listen, we didn't know for sure, and that's why we didn't say anything, but it still seems like they took an awfully long time.
It does seem like a...
I mean, this is, coming from someone who, I don't know the realities of how that structure works in the back end or how they figured this stuff out. So, like, maybe that's legit, but...
I think that Sony's in a really tough spot here. If you kind of put yourself in the shoes of whoever's making decisions about how to communicate about this stuff, you got to think that on one side, you don't want to oversell the problem and tell people like everything about PlayStation Network has been compromised. Your credit card numbers are completely out there. They're getting used. You need to cancel them right now, because that's clearly, or at least it seems to be, an overreaction. On the other hand, you don't want to undersell it and come across like, whoa, this was no big deal. There's a little security breach, but we don't think anybody really had any big. There's no big problems are going to come out of it. And so to walk that line in between is really rough for whoever is sort of determining the communications on this.
Absolutely, yeah. I have a friend who has a very good contact at Microsoft, and he said that the mood around Microsoft was not floating. No, it because I think some of the speculations that Sony was sort of put in the crosshairs of maybe whatever constitutes the hacking community by the earlier thing with the root key of the PlayStation 3 and the lawsuit against GeoHot and Anonymous, this hacking ring that had basically found the root key that would sort of allow you to make your own kind of installations of software into a PS3.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think where it all stemmed from was like originally when the PS3 came out, they allowed you to install Linux on it, and then they released a patch that made that no longer possible. And there were a lot of hackers and a lot of people in the community who wanted PS3 to be more open, who were upset about that. And so that's where this all originally stems from.
Right, and then the court case where they tried to basically stop this anonymous hacking ring from, kind of.
I don't think that was Anonymous. I think that was just that GeoHot.
Oh, just the one guy. I thought he was the leader of that, though.
No. Anonymous is just this totally separate entity.
Oh, okay. I was confused.
They were threatening to go after Sony because of that, but not because that guy is necessarily, as far as we know, related to them in any way.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But they claim that they're not involved in this.
That is what they're saying.
Credit card thing, who knows? But
so your guy at Microsoft.
Oh, basically they just, I think they rightly feel that Sony has gotten a lot of bad press within that community, and might have been, people just wanted to show Sony how little power they really had over the situation. And Microsoft, I think behind the scenes, they've been pretty mum on this issue. I mean, obviously, I'm sure they're taking all the efforts to improve security, but if you look at it over time, I mean, is anything really immune to this? If the hacking community and all those thousands of guys that are frankly just as good at security breaching as the multi-billion-dollar companies you hire for security consulting are, I mean, is anyone immune? We've seen WikiLeaks. We've seen any variety of big companies having their websites taken down.
I mean, and I think that's what it comes down to. What Matt was saying earlier is like that kind of outage, that problem where whether they're getting hacked or whether it's some other issue where the system is just down, you're not able to access it for a certain amount of time. That's possible anywhere, and that's going to happen from time to time, and that's relatively understandable. And I mean, like Microsoft in the past, when they've had bad 360 outages or Xbox Live outages, they've handed out a free game, and that's sort of what I expected to happen here. Is I expected PSN to be down for a few days and then for them to hand out a free game, like a free PSN game. But the problem comes in when information starts getting leaked, personal information of any kind, but then especially when the question is like, your credit cards might have been part of that and they were encrypted, but they might have been able to figure out the encryption or whatever. Like at that point, it's like that is where you guys need to take responsibility. Like if you are giving us the ability to put our credit card info on here, if you're making that a core part of your system that we need to put in our personal information to buy stuff, you need to do every step possible to protect that information.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a lot of ways, the maybe thing is almost worse.
Yeah,
they just said like, okay, everybody, our bad. You need to cancel your credit cards right now.
I agree, because it's like, well, yeah, it left me thinking like, should I go through the effort of canceling my credit card? Like, obviously, it's better safe than sorry, but like, I don't really know what to. Yeah, it's a huge pain, and I don't know what to think. Like, I don't know if this is a serious threat. I don't know like what are the chances that my card has been compromised. Like, they have not given me a good sense of that, so I don't really know.
And there's the other side of it too. I was talking to a friend of mine that's a programmer, and not even in games, but he said he had heard about this thing about 3 weeks ago on like some boards that he goes to and things. And there was this other scam that they were doing where they were basically kind of like being able to like do this little cycle of like registering fake credit card numbers and like accumulating like thousands of dollars in the PlayStation Network and able to use it to fully buy things. And that was another big reason Sony took this down, because, when you talk about those independent developers, if they're spooling all these like fake thousands of dollars, they could be buying like tons of DLC and other things that are, where the money's supposed to be going back to an indie developer that now won't see money for those sales, which is, kind of invalidates the whole, digital outlet for games kind of model if you can't protect the, integrity of the payment system.
Another thought that I've seen floating around as people are discussing this is just with the system being down, the inability to play games online. I've seen some people pointing to that as evidence of, we're seeing more and more developers move away from just traditional single player games. Like, I know we had a story that just this week where Valve was saying Portal 2 could be their last traditional single player game. And I saw a lot of people pointing to this event and saying, hey, here's one of the reasons we still need single-player games, because stuff like this is inevitably going to happen from time to time. There's going to be times when we can't just straight up cannot get online. So if your game is completely based around multiplayer or around co-op gameplay, and if we go to some sort of future where the vast majority of games are like that, then there's just nothing we can do when the PlayStation Network or Xbox Live or whatever else we're playing on in the future is down.
Absolutely. And if you looked at the games that came out that week, Mortal Kombat and Portal probably gave you enough to chew on with the single-player mode. But at this point, if somebody bought SOCOM, should they be able to get a refund? Because no one, I know they throw in those other modes of SOCOM with like bots and things like that.
This is the first SOCOM, at least probably not the first one, but I watched Jeff play it a little bit. But I know one of the big focuses with this SOCOM was that they wanted to have a deeper, more interesting single-player modes. There is actually like a single-player story-based campaign.
Oh, I haven't played SOCOM in years.
But I just still think like the people who are buying SOCOM, that's not what they're interested in. Sure. Like they want to play online.
And then you've got, there's certainly existing games. So we're talking about new product, but there are plenty of games that the only real play that they're getting anymore on PSN is in the multiplayer. Not the least of which, certainly you've got the Call of Duties of the world, any of the like online FPS games. But games like DC Universe Online,
there's a great
that's
example.
A game that, like, fundamentally, unless you're playing on PC, you can't play right now.
There's got stuff like Little Big Planet, Little Big Planet 2, rather. Wasn't it also, I read the Infamous 2 beta? Isn't that supposed to be going on, like, right now?
It is. It has been going on.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that and I know Sony released a statement about how they are extending that, obviously, because they have to, because that's supposed to be happening and nobody can access it.
Speaking of DC Universe Online, they did Sony Online, which is, they're part of Sony, but they are sort of a different developer within that larger scheme of things. But they have actually announced today that they are going to be doing what Phil, you were talking about, some make good things. They're talking about having some special events this weekend across our game portfolio, including Double Station Cash Day on Saturday, April 30th. We're also working on a make good plan, in quotes, for players of the PS3 versions of DC Universe Online and Free Realms. So they seem like they're heading towards, I don't know whether that'll be giving away, free stuff in game, or what.
Or like some free game time, I would assume. I mean,
well, and that's a good example of how like an event like this really crosses and affects the business lives of a lot of people. It's not just Sony, who at the end of the day, I mean, maybe you're a Sony hater and you really don't like that company, you don't like the consoles they make and that sort of thing, but are you willing to say the same thing about the 5-person team that makes that one little independent game that comes out on PSN, or about the guys who work as let's say a community manager on DC Universe Online? Like there's a lot of people who have nothing to do with the security infrastructure of Sony, who nonetheless are caught in the crossfires of something like this, and it really screws them over.
And I mean, I think you got to go from the opposite side of that too. Like even if you're a hardcore Sony fan, like I said, I've seen a lot of people in the comments and on Twitter and everything really defending Sony on this.
Yeah.
And like, even if you are the biggest Sony fan, even if you've loved the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, which I have, you've got to kind of realize, like, whatever the problem is, like, they've made some mistakes here.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it's going to have some serious ramifications. It's going to be really, I think Sony is going to have some difficulties for a little while, like getting over this, getting everything running and gaining back people's trust.
And I'm curious, I mean, it's still down, right?
It is. There was a rumor going around today. I saw that it's going to be back up on May 3rd was the rumor I was seeing. So that's still a while yet. That's still a few days.
Because then I had heard, and this is strictly conjecture, I think, but a rumor that I heard was that it could, almost be like this, the way that it was hacked or whatever could be almost like not a fatal flaw, but basically they might have to sort of have you re-register your accounts, because it was described to me as this way. Imagine that you had a bank vault and there was one key that turned the bank vault lock, and everyone that had access to this vault, you gave a copy of that key to, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden one day you go in there and you open the key and there's a guy in the bank vault that doesn't have a key and he just got in there, and you're like, well, we have to build a new vault and a new key, and we have to then
I think that ties in,
get the locks changed.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I think that ties into that rumor that they were completely rebuilding PSN, which we'll see. We'll have to see. I'm very curious.
Again, I don't know about mass level like networking technology and security and stuff, but this was how it was described to me in an analogy that said, and this person I don't know necessarily knew exactly how Sony's network worked, but I think they knew something about how these things operate, and just logically it does make sense. I mean, obviously their source has to be like a digital key with everyone's system and everyone's account, and if those are all compromised, that's problematic.
One other thing to bring up that because I know that somebody in the comments will yell at me if I don't mention this. In addition to accepting that Sony made some serious mistakes, it is also worth passing some blame on to the hackers themselves. Like, whoever did this,
absolutely.
You guys are kind of jerks.
Yeah.
I don't really like you.
Yeah, I don't understand the mentality of a lot of the stuff that goes on in that whole thing. I mean, I guess people really don't like corporations controlling their behavior online and things like that. And
the frustrating part though is like when personal information and credit card information starts leaking out, that's when it's no longer just hurting the corporation, but it's hurting everyone.
Just people.
Yeah.
And like Miller said, there's plenty of because we're all lucky enough to meet a lot of game developers and people like that and see how hard they work and how much effort and time and money and blood, sweat, and tears goes into the games. And when people, I mean, I know that, hackers like to kind of spin it about freedom of information and sort of freedom online, but a lot of it, I believe, has to do with piracy and the desire to just, be able to get things for free and run pirated software as well, and I think that hurts a lot of people that, aren't Big Brother or whatever you think, Sony or Microsoft is. So,
do you have the story about how much, there was somebody making a prediction about how much money this could cost Sony?
Yeah, I believe that was a Forbes.com, Forbes magazine, and they basically, and I think this is sort of an analyst just sort of looking at data from afar without really understanding the cost for Sony in terms of logistics. But I think, 77 million user accounts. And the article says there are too many variables to put a concrete price on the mess up, but data security research firm, the Poneman Institute, states that the average data breach cost a company $318 per compromised users. So while simply applying that average to the total number of accounts, that would result in $24 billion.
Sure.
That doesn't take into, accounts, that are duplicate accounts or
like we don't know necessarily how many people were compromised or how many accounts were compromised.
Exactly. And how many,
and especially that credit card number thing, whether that turns out to be, yes, it really was encrypted and they couldn't access it, or no, it turns out they could indeed access some of those credit card numbers. That particular point is really going to make a big difference in the bottom line at the end of the day.
But, I'm sure it's not going to be 24 billion, but it could be $1 billion.
I mean, Sony will take a hit this year.
Obviously Microsoft dealt with, I think $1 billion loss dealing with like the Red Ring of Death thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be much less than that, but say if it was 1/24th the cost would be $1 billion. So that's a fair chunk of change to fix that stuff. So, it's really interesting, we all live in a sort of a digital world now, whether that's your iTunes account or your Amazon account or any number of
cyber world, if you will.
A cyber world, yes. Any
Sony used to sell this experience as.
Any number of retailers, might have your credit card information online, and it is kind of scary. And like, I actually made a joke on Twitter that maybe those retail prepaid cards weren't so low class anymore that you buy at retail. I've actually always done that on Xbox Live just because it limits my spending kind of and doesn't give me that, always just being able to buy whatever I want. So if I buy a $50 card, I know it's like, well, I only have $5 left. So kind of, I don't know. I've always just done that way, and I'm happy about that decision now. So maybe that's a good option for people moving forward.
The real tragedy here is all of our inabilities to access PlayStation Home in the last week and a half.
Yeah, it's.
I feel really bad about that. I wonder how my avatar is doing.
I had a new T-shirt or something I was really excited about.
Yeah.
I was gonna go bowling.
Yeah.
And be creepy to women.
You can do that in real life, Matt. We can do that tonight.
We could go bowling and be creepy to women in real life, not just PlayStation Home.
Let's get done with this podcast. Let's go do that.
All right, that's a good plan,
Phil.
This is a great plan. Maybe this has all been for the better, actually. It's teaching us to really go, carpe diem.
I feel good about this.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, guys. We're heading down to the bowling alley. In the next segment, we're gonna have some guys in, and we're gonna do our promised reader mailbag segment, part 1. Game Informer show is back. As I explained at the beginning of the show, this podcast was originally supposed to be an entire reader mailbag segment, but then obviously the PlayStation Network hacking scandal broke off later that day after I posted the story to get your questions. So we felt like we had to address that in the first segment, being such a huge story. So what we're going to do is we're going to do just like a part 1 of Reader Mailbag this week, and then next week we will get more of your questions that were on the thread on the news story that I posted on GameInformer.com. Kind of finish it up next week, but we wanted to give you at least a little bit of Reader Mailbag this week. To that end, I'm joined by Joe Juba.
Hey.
Andy Reiner.
Hey, Matt.
And Dan Reichert.
Hey.
So yeah, this will be a little shorter than we planned, but we are going to try to get to as many of your questions as we can. Get started here. The first question is by Agent 135, and this is we get a lot of questions, I guess. Just sort of wanting the behind-the-scenes look about how we do some of our things, and I think it's good Reiner's here because he sort of helps organize and give assignments with a lot of our cover stories. Agent 135's question is, how many people on average go out on your cover stories? If more than one, why isn't everyone credited in the cover story, in the article, in the mag? Also, do they involve you flying out to the developer, them flying to you, or a mix of both? So that's kind of an interesting one.
That's a good question.
It is, there's various ways that we go about things.
First, well, I think it's crazy. We have 135 different agents on our site.
I know, it's great.
And second, it varies on the cover story and the opportunity that we have. I would say any given month, it's at least 2 to 3. For the Volition trip we went for Saints Row, we ended up sending 4 because we could drive down there. We kind of made a party of it. A road trip.
Were they in Champaign?
Champaign, Illinois, yep. But we usually send a writer and then Ben Hansen, our video guy, or, we're going to have other video people helping out as well, on future opportunities. But there's always a video guy to shoot the interviews. And then sometimes we have other writers go as well. So you see a lot of content going up on GameInformer.com. That's what the second writer usually handles. We have one writer focusing on the story for the magazine.
Right.
And then the website, there's the 2 writers. If we do have a second writer there. Otherwise, if there's just one writer that goes out, he has to cover all that, or he or she has to cover all that stuff.
Right.
Like, for instance, I wrote, I wrote the Mass Effect cover story. So, but like Brian Vore and Ben Hansen were out on that trip with me. But like the reason everyone's not credited is because I'm the one who actually wrote the story that appears in the magazine. But we sort of, because we have all those other eyes on there, it's good, we have other writers contributing the content, across the website also.
Yeah, and Brian might have wrote a story for the website, but it might have been from an interview that Joe did. Ben Hansen will post a video on the site, but it's content that Joe and Brian might have, got. So it's a very collaborative process.
And it's interesting. Just I've been here a long time, and since we've really retooled Game Informer 2.0, and that's sort of a change because it used to just be basically one guy went out. We didn't do a whole lot of extra online content. We didn't really do any video stuff at all. So it used to just be kind of like one guy, a recorder, notepad, and that was about it. I'd say in terms of us going to them, that's probably the case 99% of the time. Yep. I can remember a few instances where people might have come here to bring the game, but it's so much better to me to sort of be on